Hi guys, welcome to the channel. This video is about the drums and it's the continuation of the EQ course which I'm currently doing on my channels. And I have two videos. The first one is about the theory and it has some very important concepts which will help you to start using EQ in real life more consciously. And the last video was about EQing your kick and bass. And if you've not seen those, go and do that. I'll leave the link in the description and in the suggestion. Okay, to go up with the drums, the kick and bass sounds like that. I'd like to start with the at. I have an EQ on every single at, as well as an EQ on the group channel for the ats. And basically what I've done there is that I've cut the middle range of the at so it sounds cleaner and also more like deeper in the mix. That's what usually happens when we cut the 1K, 2K area. And also here I'm cutting some, I think, nasty and unpleasant frequency, and I'm also using a high shelf filter on almost any sound, whether it's a at, drums, kick and bass, so almost any sound, because after that I usually add higher frequencies with an analog EQ emulation because it has some very nice character. And without the EQ, the at sounds like that. And now with the EQ. The difference is not very big, and I would say it shouldn't be too big, because when you are EQing, try to EQ to cut as less as possible, because at the end of the day we want to keep as much of the original signal as possible, because in the mix it will sound much more cleaner compared when you are like cutting a lot from the sound. Also will sound less natural, so pay attention to that, guys. Okay, so let's move to the next stat, and basically you can see pretty much the same thing. It just sits better in the mix when we use settings like that. So guys, for the most cases you would usually need to cut somewhere in the mid and make a low cut and maybe a low shelf filter as well, maybe necessary in some cases. It also really helps to get the cleanest mix, so try to use all of the filters. They all are very useful. But also guys, pay attention to the thing that the low end for the ads will be much higher than the low end for some instrument, kick and bass for example, maybe a synthesizer. It's very important. And the last thing is a ride, which sounds like that. And now with an EQ, as you can see, unpleasant harmonic, which I've cut, and basically I've just done the same thing, the high shelf filter, cutting the mid and low mid and the low cut. And now the last thing for the ads before we go to claps is a group EQ with a low shelf filter. So I've freed a little bit more space to the kick and bass, since we don't really need that low end for our ats. Yeah, sounds a little bit cleaner. This is exactly what we need. Let's now move to the claps. And for the claps, I'm using 2 claps and a snare. So for the first clap, I've made a low cut. I don't really recommend cutting more than 100, at least for the low layer of the clap, since I'm using 2 claps. I've also cut the middle range for the clap as well. And for the second clap, the EQ settings are a little bit different because we already have the low end for our clap. That's why I'm cutting more of the lows for my second clap. And now the final sound is the snare, and for the snare the same rules apply as well. So a low cut at 100, the low shelf. So again, we are freeing the space for our kick and bass, so we don't have a lot of muddy frequencies in our drums. Now, pretty much same thing again, cutting the high mid and mid frequencies. And finally, the group EQ on the claps. I think it's pretty simple, guys. If you think that's odd, don't worry. The more you EQ your things, your instruments, your drums, the more experienced you get and the more you'll understand and hear the difference, which is the most important thing. You should hear that. And now the most interesting part is the group processing. The first plugin I'm using on my group is called Isotope Trash 2, which I think is the best plugin for layering. I made a tutorial about this plugin, so I'm going to put the link in the suggestion and in the description as well. So it's basically a parallel compression I'm using. So I'm squeezing with a compressor my drums with a very high rate, and I'm mixing this to the original sound to give it more character, to make it sound more interesting. So without the trash plugin, sounds like that. Difference is not as big, but it definitely sounds a little bit more interesting. The next part is an EQ, and again the same thing, cutting the middle range, the high shelf filter, the low shelf filter. So very simple. Don't try to go crazy on the group channels, because you just need to shape your sound just a little bit. Try to do all the work on the separate channels. Okay, the next step is a transient processor. I'm using a DS10, which I think is a really good transient processor. By using it, I give a little bit more presence to my drums in the context of the mix. So let's listen with the transient shaper. Yeah, sounds a little bit better. The next step is a saturator. You could use basically any saturator. I'm just a big fan of tape emulations, any kind of tape emulations. That's why I'm using this one. And saturation works in some way as a compressor. It reduces the dynamic range, and on the drums especially, it sounds so nice. And the next step is a compressor. Unfortunately, I cannot show you this in action because my CPU just cannot handle that, and I cannot record the video properly. But the concept is like that. I'm using a compressor after the saturation. And now, guys, the most interesting part is adding, I would say it's the most pleasant part, because your drums start to sound much crisper, nicer, better, and things like that. So what I'm doing here, I'm cutting the 300 I would say it's the muddy area, and I'm boosting the low end, and together with the kick and bass it sounds better, I think. And I'm also boosting the higher frequency, so 12k. You could choose from 3 to 16. I think 12 sound nice. But be very careful, guys. You could easily boost more than necessary. As you can see, guys, it's very simple. You just need to follow the pattern and know what plugins to use in which cases. I think that was all for today, all I wanted to share with you guys. Hope you liked the video, and if you did, please share this video maybe to your producer friend on your social media. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.